Nelson J. Bradley was on his way from Saskatchewan, Canada, to the University of Michigan. His car broke down in Minnesota. Such a seemingly insignificant detail in the overall scope of things, yet somehow this breakdown led to Nelson Bradley becoming known as the father of modern-day alcoholism treatment. Because of a lack of funds with which to fix his car, Bradley took a job as a houseman in a Minneapolis hospital. A short time later, he became a physician at Hastings State Hospital in Hastings, Minnesota. Here, he was introduced to alcoholism. Fred, an administrative assistant there, had helped himself to become a recovering alcoholic. Bradley had gotten to know Fred and began to learn about alcoholism and Alcoholics Anonymous from him. In 1950, Dr. Bradley became superintendent of Wilmar State Hospital, which was a receiving center for mental patients and a drying out tank for alcoholics in Minnesota. Prior to this time, alcoholics and mental patients were mixed together, and essentially there was no treatment program specifically designed for the alcoholic. It was there that Bradley, along with Fred and Dr. Rossi and a few others, who began to develop an alcoholism treatment program that would become the basic model of the modern-day alcoholism treatment. It was Bradley who, through his creative thinking, his ideas, his push, that much of the foundation of the program took place. The program included the concept of an interdisciplinary team. Like the multidisciplinary approach, there would be professionals that represent the different aspects of the whole person: physical, mental, emotional, social, and spiritual. But interdisciplinary meant something more and different. It meant that each member of the team had to be knowledgeable and comfortable with all these dimensions, including the spiritual. For the treatment of the whole person, members of the team had to be holistic people rather than just focused within their own discipline. This was a new concept. The concept went further with a radical dimension. The professional team would include people recovering from the illness who are active in Alcoholics Anonymous. The primary requirement for such a position would be not an advanced degree in a helping profession, but experience with and recovery from alcoholism. Any knowledge and skill needed beyond this would be provided by training within the program. Bradley also was the catalyst in bringing the spiritual aspects of illness and recovery central to the treatment program. Thus, the spiritual recovery program of AA would be at the heart and center of the treatment program. Also, in 1955, upon the request of Lutheran Social Services, Pastor John Keller was called by the American Lutheran Church for a full-time specialized ministry in alcoholism. At that time, Dr. Frederick Norstad was the director of chaplaincy services for Lutheran Social Services of Minnesota. He was conducting clinical pastoral education at Wilmar. Pastor Keller tells about his call.
See, and then the concept that we call human ecology here, that philosophy, that really had its beginnings at Wilmar as this program evolved, because he got into what we now call the interdisciplinary team. And there was a point in this history when Chris Norstad was running his clinical training program out there for pastors, and got to know Bradley and got to know something about alcoholism, but it was Bradley who said to Fritz, you know, the church ought to get involved in this and start talking about the spiritual dimensions. And it was out of that that the call was issued to me to go full-time into alcoholism, which added the pastor to the team. And that came from him. Some people don't know that. You know, the church issued the call, but the idea came from Brad.
In the late 1950s, Dr. Norstad became a consultant to Dr. Norris Nessett, then chairman of the board of Lutheran Deaconess Hospital and of Lutheran General Hospital, which was being built in Park Ridge. In the planning and the development for the hospital, not only was the treatment of the whole person incorporated into a philosophy called human ecology, but also the decision was made to provide alcoholism treatment services at Lutheran General, and as soon as possible to build an alcoholism center for treatment, training, and research. So it was that Lutheran General in 1959 became the first general hospital in the country, actually in the world, to provide an alcoholism treatment program rather than just detoxification. And it was the first general hospital to build a center like this as a strong statement by the church, directed to the church and to the nation, that alcoholism is treatable and that the church is aware, understands, cares, and can help. Dr. Bradley was asked to become the chairman of psychiatry and the medical director of alcoholism services months before the hospital opened. He was soon joined by Dr. Gene Rossi as chief psychologist, and soon after, in 1963, Pastor Keller was also asked to join the staff. All of what we have today, and in the Parkside Medical Services alcoholism treatment facilities around the country, would not be if that car had not broken down in Minnesota, and if it were not for the very bright, gifted, insightful, and creative person whom we honor, Dr. Nelson J. Bradley. Reverend Carl Anderson, Dr. Bill Filstead, Reverend John Keller, and Dr. Gene Rossi recently shared some of their thoughts on Dr. Bradley and what it was like to work with him.
Well, I think that's what I recall when I first met Bradley and got to know him a bit here, was that there was a willingness to experiment in areas where their people thought they knew what they were doing. But Bradley was really interested in finding continuing new ways to do it. So there was never any kind of sacredness to the existing present. There always was a belief and a commitment to doing things better in a better way and a better mousetrap. And that sort of like anti-orthodoxy and almost pro-creativity really was a hallmark that I recall from day one when I met him.
You know, that's right. And there's a key element in this that we've talked about the kind of environment, and Gene talks about the staff meetings and the squabbling that go on, and nobody was thought to have all the answers, including Dr. Bradley as the superintendent of the state hospital. But another piece in that is, in all of the people that I have met in my life, there are very few people that were as non-moralistic and non-judgmental as Brad. And I think that was a key element in that climate, that you knew if you were off base or if you're going down the wrong track or you're arguing about something you didn't know anything about, that nobody was going to enter into a judgmental response.
And I think it needs to be a reminder that if we're going to hang on to that sort of creativity in the future, we have to have that kind of style together where there's, you know, you're identifying ecology with them is fascinating to think back on it. Almost all the major principles of ecology were demonstrated by the way Brad lived. He encouraged equality among the staff.
What he did naturally is what we're sort of making a fuss about.
Yeah.
He never had to think twice about paying attention to you or to me or to you or to someone else, irrespective of what we come with. It was second nature.
I think he'd want somebody to say, and not him but us, but it was him. That embedded in him and therefore embedded in the alcoholism treatment program model that was put together at Wilmer and transplanted down here was a profound belief in the capacity of patients and families to help one another. That he just didn't see it as a professional treatment group providing treatment for patients and their families.
And of course the message and all that, I think he was trying to say that the secret to change is not in all this mumbo jumbo and seeing the doctor all the time. The secret to change is discovering your humanity by getting in a community and interacting. And I think he was a real pioneer in the sense that he knew alcoholics deserved the attention of the healthcare field.
Dr. Bradley had a very special interest in research, education, and training. It is that very special interest that has led to this center. Research had a high value for him and was incorporated in the initial planning. He put education, through lectures and films, into the treatment program. He recognized the need for education to help change perceptions and enlarge understanding. Training was a primary responsibility in the treatment program. There was always a need for more trained people, and the training had to be done in the clinical environment of the treatment program. So it was that Lutheran Center for Substance Abuse was initially called the Alcoholism Rehabilitation Center for Treatment, Training, and Research, with the understanding that education for various publics and the broader community was also included in the mission. He would be most pleased to know that there is now in this building a specific place for this purpose. It was one of his dreams to have such a center. Indeed, it is fitting that this area be dedicated as the Nelson J. Bradley Center for Research, Education, and Training. We are pleased to so honor him and grateful for those whose gifts have made this possible.
Prior to starting, you and I were laughing about how Bradley would be saying, are we going to do another thing, like getting together to talk about him, or another plaque?
He must be laughing at us.
And exactly, I
Certainly.
said he is, in his earthy way, making a big joke about what we're doing. And I think that speaks to his humility as a very common, self-effacing person who really did not take credit for lots of things which clearly he could take credit for. I know Gene and I have talked about this a couple of times about, are we really dedicating this to Bradley? And are we really sort of setting up some kind of worship of Bradley? And are people sort of going to reverence the past? And I think both he and I feel real in a similar way about this, that it's for what he stood. He's an embodiment of a certain set of values and an ability to articulate them that we feel is at the core of our belief system. And I think Brad would be the first to say that I appreciate what you've done, but you're doing it for yourself, to reaffirm what we stand for.
Yeah.
And it's not to somehow acknowledge me. And yet, I think some staff here might think, what's the big deal about Bradley? It's not a big deal about Bradley. It's a big deal about the values of Bradley.